Anybody else?
You ready for your meeting?
I believe so. I didn't think it'd be on a computer, so I got this instead.
How about Ross Shea?
That'll work.
Yeah.
It's really just a bar.
No, and I said, hey,
You always
thanks.
know when Kirk gets the mics on.
Blah, blah, blah.
I'm worried about plugging and unplugging.
He had
Sparkle.
a guy last night.
Okay.
One of their machines that they used to plow put diesel fuel in the,
So you're saying we gotta watch what we say?
so. And he said I had another one that gelled up on me, so he was out doing that whole lot this morning with his pickup truck. But, you know, he was doing it, so that's where I met him.
I did have one.
There you go. Yeah, you got to do it as a candidate, and you have to do it as a. Yeah, Vicky, fifth floor.
Remember being at sometime on New Year's Eve, and it was 22 below zero, and everybody was out dressed up just like nothing was going on.
Okay, being it is now 5 o'clock, we will call this committee of the whole meeting to order. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Mayor Miller.
Here.
Alderpersons Clem.
Here.
McClanathan.
Here.
Ross.
Here.
Parker. Busker.
Here.
Brashaw.
Here.
Keister.
Here.
And Berberay is absent.
And if you could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance led by Alderman Keister.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And Alderman Keister, this meeting's yours.
Thank you, Mayor. Approval of minutes. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Motion to approve by Alderperson Bradshaw, seconded by Alderman Ross. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
And then you actually missed the agenda, so you need to back up.
I thought that's what I did, is approval of agenda.
You did minutes.
You said minutes.
Oh, my apologies. Well, we can still do the minutes and then go back? Yeah, all right. So that motion passed, and we'll back up to item number 4, approval of the agenda. Apologize about that. Do we have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second. Motion approved by Alderman McClanathan, seconded by Alderperson Bradshaw. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion carries. Public comments. Do we have any public comments on agenda items? No. Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item number 7, presentation regarding restructuring ambulance fees, fire billing, and lift assist charges by Fire Chief Allen.
Thank you, Alderman Keister. Okay. There's 3 items on here, and we're going to go through one at a time. The first 2 would take ordinance to pass, and so it would take approval of an ordinance for the ambulance fees and the fire fees. The third item is more informational and looking for direction. So we'll go through each one. 2 of these first items, if you remember back in May, I gave a presentation as well. So we've kind of reworked it, taken some of your advice, and I'll give you the information going forward. So just an overview again, ambulance fees, as we go on calls and we make transports to the hospital, those calls are billed, and they're billed through the Andres Billing Company, who goes through the insurance companies or Medicare, Medicaid, whatever it may be, and we bill those calls out. The last fee increase was in 2015, so it's been almost 5 years since we've increased the fees. That said, we need to get to where the median is for other services that provide the same type of care. So we're a little bit behind right now, and that's what I'm going to talk about, is trying to get to a median fee structure. and then a maintenance after that. Obviously, it's important for us to recoup our costs. It's a public sector business, but the healthcare industries, the equipment that we use continues to increase. So with the increase in call volumes we've seen over the last couple years and the increase in the supplies, we're a little bit behind in where we should be billing at this time. And again, also, when we bill and when we receive billing payments, it goes into a fire improvement fund, and that's fund number 32. Typically, we budget in a year to receive and to spend out of that about $675,000. That's usually a safe number because we do receive billing amounts that are higher than that, but that's typically been a safe amount, that's $675,000. The 60-40 split, if you remember also, the city receives at this time 60% of that money, the $405,000. Fire department receives the 40%, which is $270,000. We use that to pay the bond payment for Central Fire Station, the Engine 2 when we purchased that a few years back. Those are those things that we pay off. Also, we're funding as a capital improvement plan part of our firefighter gear hose replacement, and things we're not funding right now just because the money's not there is SCBA, ambulance replacement, fire engine replacement. So those are all things that still hang out there that we want to move toward this fire improvement fund to fund some of those items. At a glance, 2018, we saw a 2.5% increase over call volume in 2017. And if you look back a decade, it's been about a 3.5% increase per year over the last decade. But 2017 was that big increase. We saw a 7.5% increase over 2016. So of those 4,337 EMS calls that we received, 3,236 were actually transported to FHN. So that left 1,100 calls roughly that were non-transports. Those were refusals. We arrived on scene and maybe we treated the patient and they no longer wanted to go to the hospital. Maybe it was somebody that was not needed, or a public assist, which is lift assist, and we'll talk about that later on in another presentation. But those are part of those 1,100 calls. The breakdown of billing on those 3,200 calls that we did transport, 9.5 had private insurance, 4% had no insurance at all, 57.5 were Medicare, Medicaid patients, and then the 29% that are left are Medicare, Medicaid HMOs. So a little bit of the history of the fire fees. Typically, we would increase 5 or 10%, but it wasn't consistent. So it might be next year we come back and we say, hey, we're behind the median again, we need to catch up, or maybe in 2 years. In this case, it's been 5 years since we brought this forward. There's a trend going toward flat rate billing. So on the next slide, we'll look at the different billing rates, whether it's an ALS call, a BLS call, resident, non-resident, and we want to go to a flat rate billing. And since we can no longer bill for individual supplies, it's easier to have that flat rate billing. We want to stay in the median for where we're at in the state line area, and that'd be a little bit into Wisconsin and around our area and even a little bit downstate, and maintain the same billing process. What we also want to change is the CPI, and this going by the Consumer Price Index so that we can just raise it on an annual basis by inflation rather than coming back time after time to try to raise this. That would be consistent with how we raise water and sewer rates in the city. It would also be consistent with how FHN handles their billing processes internally at the hospital. And again, that all would be handled through Andre's billing service. Now, if you look at the top yellow line, that's currently what we charge for, if you look at the very top, there's resident and non-resident fees. And then under that, you have ALS2, which is going to be a critical call where we're using a lot of equipment, a lot of supplies. ALS call is going to be 75% of the calls that we do are ALS. That's where we provide IV therapy, we put you on a heart monitor. And then the BLS calls are very non-urgent type calls where we're basically transporting a patient with very minimal care. The median rate for all of those agencies listed below the yellow line is going to come out to around $1,000 for an ALS2 resident, and you can kind of go across the line. Those are going to be your median rates. At the very bottom black line is what our proposal is to just go to a flat fee. It'd be $850 for a resident, whether it's ALS, ALS2, or BLS, and then the non-resident would move to that 1,200. That still puts us just a little bit below the median, but right in that range. We're not too high, we're not too low. And again, this is, shows you just the rate analysis of where we're at, and what we propose is just a simple flat fee structure. So just conservative figures, trying to get us to the median. It's going to raise about $20,000. Again, not too high, not too low. And what we would like to do is move forward with CPI increases, and basically allow that to take care of the increases going forward, so that we don't have to come back and we don't have inconsistent 1 year we do it and then we wait 5 years before we do it again and we're behind. So at this time, I'll take any questions you might have on this.
Any questions for Chief Miller or the Fire Chief on this? Almost said Chief Miller for some reason.
Have you recovered from May when you were up here before and brought this to us?
I licked my wounds and I'm back for more.
No, I'm just kidding you, because, you know, as you look at it, there's a lot more involvement to it than what you think. One of my concerns was, and I looked at it as you went through it there, and I see at the end where you're asking for, where you're going for the flat rate stuff, was number one, the main reason for doing this is number one, to enhance revenue and get up where we ought to be. But in many cases, the insurance companies are paying for this, and the insurance companies, if I remember from years past, are all used to seeing bigger fees than what we have. So when they come through, they don't bat an eye at paying it. And I see where on this chart, I believe you listed that there was about 4% that paid out of pocket.
Correct, non-insured.
How does that work if we get into a situation where those people theoretically really can't pay, or they don't fall into the Medicare, they don't fall into these areas? How do those usually end up?
In collections,
Okay.
typically. And, you know, quite honestly, of that 4%, we only collect 3% of that 4%, if that makes any sense. So if 4% as a whole, we're only able to, so it's almost a non-factor.
Okay. Could I continue?
Please.
I guess the other thing that we should emphasize a little bit, maybe we don't need to go back to the first one where you had, where you broke it down. Explain a little bit more to us about the assisted and the calls that, you know, that we do hardly anything, we just help people, so on and so forth. And then as they stage up, there are 2 stages, ALS 1 and 2?
Correct, yeah. BLS, which is a basic, that's going to be somebody tripped on the curb, twisted their ankle. We're going to come in, we're going to splint it, we're going to put them in the ambulance, take them to the hospital for x-rays, let the ER take care of them. An ALS call, it's going to be, you know, maybe somebody's having difficulty breathing, chest pain, could have a stroke, various medical ailments that we're going to want to start a line, IV line, put them on a heart monitor, more equipment, a little bit more expertise. And then your ALS 2 is going to be a heavy trauma. It's going to be your cardiac arrest patients, those type of calls.
I think there, and maybe tell me where it falls in here, and maybe it's in the first one. I know there's times that you do a lot of assists too, also.
Correct.
I mean, where, you know, a person has slipped and fell, you go help them out, you know, help them get up, do this and that. How is that usually handled?
We send an ambulance out.
Okay.
If they've fallen, I've fallen and I can't get up, like the life alert. We see the commercials all the time. We send an ambulance out for the medical assessment, make sure that they're okay. And if they just need help getting back into a chair, then we'll move them, get them back into a chair. It could be that the family no longer can lift that patient, so they need help getting to a car to get to a doctor's appointment. Those are all services we offer to the community free of charge. That's what we're here for.
Okay.
So those are some of those 1,100 calls that we respond to that we don't end up billing because they're not transported to the hospital.
And the billing only takes place when the ambulance leaves the curb and, or when the patient gets in, we take them to the hospital.
At that,
Those are the ones that are only billable.
correct. That's the only things we can bill at this time. There is some legislation moving through for treatment in the field that could be billed through insurance and Medicare and Medicaid, moving toward that community paramedicine model. But that is still sitting in Springfield. They haven't done anything with it yet.
Just the last one, if I could. I remember either last time or when Chief Miller was here, there was a large discussion on, as you go to the hospital, it used to be that they resupplied you on stuff that was used, and now that doesn't happen. And well, let's just throw in today the Narcan and the so on and so forth. How bad are we really getting beat up on that? Does that just kind of flow into these fees now, or what happens there, if you could?
A little bit of both. So there are certain items that, you know, we respond to the hospital. We've given a series of medications. We'll replenish those at the hospital through the pharmacy. And then those will just get billed right back to the patient. There's certain things we can't get, and oxygen masks, you know, electrodes, just different things like that we end up eating the cost on that. We can no longer bill separately for we used to be able to do that, can't do that any longer. So that's where we're trying to build those into the fees also.
This is a very important service, without a doubt, to the city, to all our constituents, and it's something that we have to keep up on, and we've been very fortunate with having newer equipment. I know we had the ambulance that we had eons of problems with and that kind of stuff, but I just appreciate what you guys do in it, and I'm in favor of taking a look at some of the modifications. I believe that we have to do some of them just to keep up, so all of a sudden here don't find ourselves in big trouble. So thank you.
Yep.
Any further questions?
Mr. Chair.
Alderperson Bradshaw.
Thank you. I do appreciate this breakdown, Chief. It is very explanatory, looking at your charts and the way you wrote it out for us to understand. And I see that it's only going to be a modest increase of approximately $20,000 compared to what was billed in the past. Is that correct?
Correct. That's right.
Will that make up some of the deficits and help with the cost effectiveness, in your opinion?
Yeah, I think it gives us a baseline, and then if we can use the CPI to increase it year to year, then we'll just stay in the median. Like I said, we don't want to be too high, we don't want to be too low, and we want to recover our costs. So we can get to that level where we're not charging too much, and then let the CPI take care of it in years coming.
And may I continue?
Please.
Thank you. And I see your staff recommends the flat rate increases to $850 per call with the annual CPI increase, which for constituents to understand, that's the Consumer Price Index. Will that be the average of the CPI each year?
Yeah, it would be whatever it went up for that year is where it would be. And that's similar to what FHN does. They raise theirs by the CPI, and they cap it at 5%. So if it ever go over 5%, they only raise it to that level.
So there are some options we have when we deal with CPI, like water and sewer. We raise it by the water and sewer CPI. So there is an EMS CPI that's embedded with it. Sometimes it's higher, sometimes it's lower than the regular CPI. And what that does is that incorporates the cost then of the drugs and other things that are used into it. So as we go forward with this, that'll be one of the discussion points with council as we draft whether we want to use the EMS CPI or the standard CPI. And I'll use water and sewer as an example. Last year, the CPI was, I think, the overall CPI was 2, water and sewer was like 2.8. Yeah, because of chemicals, cost of petroleum chemicals.
Right. Follow up?
Please.
I had one more question. I realized you said that we ate the cost of some of the particular items that were used in the ambulances that are not restocked through the hospital, billed directly to the patient. Now, is this a small amount, like in the hundreds of dollars? Is it in the thousands of dollars? Is it in the tens of thousands of dollars? And if so, are we going to average those costs in with those annual increases with the CPI increase?
So right now, we have a line item budget for those medical expenses. It's around $15,000 is what and we're real close to that. It's hard to judge because you're trying to figure out how much your call volume is going to go up. Your call volume increases, well, then your use of supplies increases. So you try to gauge that as you go into your budget. But that said, the increases that we'd see in the CPI would take into account the increases that you're going to see in medical supplies.
That answers that question. One more follow-up, if I may.
Please.
The CPI increase, when you're talking about the projected increase yearly, are we looking at rounding it off to the nearest dollar? Are we looking at $5, $10, $100? Are you gonna have a roundabout number to come up with that average, or is it gonna be like $261, some odd amount?
It would be the percentage. So if it would go up 2.1%, then that 2.1% would be reflected into our increase.
So it could be an odd amount,
Correct.
and you're going to average it across all the fee structures again?
Correct, yeah. Since it's a flat fee, then it would just all increase by whatever percentage
Okay.
it went up that year.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else?
Chair,
Alderman Clanathan.
thank you. Regarding the CPI, as we further go down the discussion, I'd like to see the differences between the EMS CPI and the standard CPI historically, what we're looking at. And I'd certainly like to see a cap also in whatever we do. I do see the merits of putting in the CPI like we did with the water and sewer. It takes it out of the annual or every 3 years or every 4 years coming back and then saying, well, gee, we're catching up. It gives a little more of a leveling. But going back to, you had the BLS, ALS, and ALS2. I imagine ALS2 is your lowest volume call?
Correct.
Okay. But it's also the most probably labor and cost-intensive calls, generally speaking?
Yes.
But you've also said, though, that most communities are going, or more communities are going towards a flat fee, whereas it seems like the prior structure seemed to take into effect, that it was more cost-intensive on the ALS2. What's the thought process behind going to a flat rate then?
So when the CPI would increase by 2%, we wouldn't get these large gaps over time between an ALS and an ALS2. The spread's going to be more and more and more. And also, what the largest percentage of what we go on are resident ALS. And those are, like I said, 75% of the calls that we go on are resident ALS. So in theory, that $850 we're charging for ALS is over the amount of what we're charging currently for that resident ALS. And so we're gonna cover the costs on all items, even though resident ALS2 is gonna be a few $100s under what we're doing now.
Sure. Follow-up? Go ahead, Manager
Please.
Groh.
So I just looked it up real quick. So last year's CPI was 2.8, and the EMS CPI was 2.6.
Follow-up?
Please do.
Historically, looking at the, do you know the historical CPIs as to whether, I remember water and sewer was definitely different than standard CPI. Does EMS historically track closer, or do we not know that yet?
I would have to go back through.
Okay.
Yeah, because what drives water and sewer is the chemical cost in dealing with petroleum and chemicals along the way. So we can look at the historic cost. I just want to give that basis for last year.
Sure.
Plus you're dealing with the copper and everything, prices of copper and metals.
Yeah.
Yeah. Follow-up?
Go ahead.
What do you know? You referenced some of the things that are going into for the fire improvement fund, and one of them bonding on Central Station. Do you know about how much we have left on that, approximately?
2028, I believe it's paid off
Okay.
at that time.
Okay.
But the one thing that is coming up is we're getting ready to pay off the engine, but we're also coming up at the end of our service life for the platform. So that'll be something you'll see in this year's capital budget out in I think it was put 2021 or 2022 to start planning on the replacement for that.
One
Go
final.
ahead.
When you're talking about billing the insurance and then the impact on individuals, now I realize we already bill, before these, just at different rates. Are these things that are subject to an individual insurance plan's deductible? So an individual would have to be taking care of it first if they haven't met their deductible in a given year?
Yeah, to a certain extent. So we'll bill out, the insurance pays what they're gonna pay for that call. And then we'll put out notification to for whatever's left on that bill. Typically, what comes back to me and to my desk and the direction I've been given is to try to give some consideration to our senior population. And so we do that, and there are a lot of write-offs that we do give for those bills that, may be hard for an older senior citizen to pay.
Thank you.
Okay. Any further questions?
Alderman Keister, But if
Alderman
I
Flynn.
could, just a quick one, and this is just out of curiosity more than anything. When you had the first page up where you had the rates of everybody, I was looking down and I was quite surprised at Rockford. And, you know, like a call between Rockford and a call between DeKalb was like twice as much money or something like that. Does it have to do with volume, do you think, or is it?
Rockford handles a little bit different, and when we were talking about billing, the insurance billing, and then some of the write-offs that we do, they don't write off anybody. They go after every penny for every person for every call. So their collection rates are a lot higher, although they're not gonna collect a lot, but they go after every dime, where we kind of take a softer approach to that and say, you know, we're not gonna burden, you know, a senior citizen with further costs. So it is a little bit different.
Okay. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Alderman Busker.
Yes. You said your line item for supplies is roughly $15,000, and this is going to increase revenues about 20,000. How long have we been not able to bill for those extra supplies that you're seeing it coming out of your budget?
Since I've been here, we haven't been able to, and when I was in Moline, and when I ran the EMS division, I think my last year was 2015 running that division, they were moving away, the billing service that they had there was moving away from billing individual items, you know, cannulas or whatever the item may be, to go to more of just a flat rate. So they had to adjust their fees there as well. So since I've been here, we've never billed out individual items.
Follow up?
Go ahead.
So this basically will just reimburse that fund where we can't charge to get that money back. That's what.
Yeah, essentially. I mean, you could look at it that way. We're replenishing that fund, but then going forward, we're just staying in the median rate to what we should be billing. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay, any further
Chief,
questions?
are you looking for something specific from the council tonight for this?
Just some direction. I mean, is this something we'd want to move forward or not?
Mr. Chair.
So what we're looking for is, so as we're preparing our budget going forward, will the council entertain going to this flat rate so we can plug this into next year's budget and also add the CPI on as part of that so we can continue to do that?
Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Thank you.
Motion.
Yeah, my questions were to ask if we could put this in ordinance form with those increases and perhaps take Alderman McClanathan's recommendation to perhaps put a cap on it. You were, I believe, I'm presuming that you were referring to the CPI increases. Maybe we'll need a little further discussion with Manager Crowe as far as how we want that worded. Is that okay with you, Alderman McClanathan?
Yes.
Thank you. So I would like to make a motion to put that in ordinance format.
Second.
We have a motion by Alderperson Bradshaw, seconded by Alderman Busker to put that in ordinance form. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right. I'd like to make a couple real quick statements, if I may here. Looking at what the rates are now, or what we're proposing now, I can remember when I first come back in the late 80s, the ambulance fee was $20. Of course, then we were basic service, so it's basically put a Band-Aid on a scoop and take them to the hospital. I do like the idea of going with the EMS CPI because I think that would give a better, outlook as to what that particular industry, what direction they're going versus staying with the standard CPI. Because we don't want to charge too much if we don't have to, but then again, we want to charge enough to cover for the increases as well. And one question for you, Chief. I know it's not a common occurrence, but I know there's been a number of times over the past year or so where other ambulance services has requested Freeport Fire to come over for lifting assist. Do we charge those services for that, or is that a freebie for them as well?
We're going to talk
That's
about
our third brief,
that. Third brief.
Okay,
third part of his brief.
okay, that's all right. That'll answer my question then. Any further questions for the chief on that? Okay, hearing none, thank you, Chief.
Okay.
Okay, moving on to item number 8, discussion of ordinance amending.
Actually, he's got more to go.
Oh, you've got one more yet.
Got two more.
My apologies, my apologies. Steve, please go ahead.
One down, two to go. Okay, back in May, I brought this forward, more informational at the time on fire fees that are now being charged around the country in different fire districts, county departments, municipal departments. And what this does, it takes into account the calls that we go on for motor vehicle accidents, car fires, structure fires. This is a service that is all handled again through our billing service that we use, Andres, and it's similar to the state statute that's on file for hazardous materials reimbursement. And that just simply says that if there is a spill, it's the spiller pays type statute that allows us to go back and then recover the costs that we have for response. This would be a soft billing process, so there'd be no cost to the policy holder. It only goes through the insurance company. So in everybody's insurance policy, whether it's homeowners or auto insurance, there is this fee built into it. We have just chosen to this point not to go after it. So if there's an at-fault party, the fire department would request to recover their costs. They would get, the bill would go directly to the insurance company and not to the homeowner themselves or to the vehicle owner. They would not receive any type of bill. Back in May, there was a question asked about, will this increase insurance rates here in the city of Freeport? This has been going on for a decade. I know in Moline, I was part of the process to get this going. There was no indication or evidence that ever increased insurance rates in a community because of this collection.
And some of the research we've done is also that for at least from the vehicle side, this is already built into your insurance rates.
So what we would focus on is motor vehicle accidents, car fires, and structure fires. And how it would work in Freeport, these are some of the numbers that we collected in 2018. We responded on 135 vehicle accidents, 6 vehicle extrications, 8 vehicle fires, and 17 structure fires that would qualify for this. That's a fire that we operated on an hour or more. So typically, and these rates these were old numbers. They've increased just a little bit, but typically those are the numbers we can collect per incident. There is a higher collection on the commission side for Andres. It's a little bit harder for them to collect it, so they collect a 20% fee as opposed to a 6% that they charge on our EMS side. But just an estimated revenue from these numbers itself would be roughly about $70,000. $88,000 would be billed minus the 20%. So they're able to collect 90% of properly documented incidents. And when you look at different fire departments around the country, there's volunteer to paid staff. They all document differently. Our people, they would make sure that they document appropriately. I have no reason to think that our people aren't documenting appropriately at this time to make sure that we recover all the costs that would be needed in this. The software that we currently use for fire documentation would integrate into the Andres system. The data would be downloaded once a month, and then there would be a check cut on the 7th of every month back to the city. This needs to be updated. It's actually 104 departments now throughout Illinois are being managed through Andres. Now, in Moline, for example, they used a different billing company. So there's more out there than 104 just because different billing companies bill. But Andres bills 104 in Illinois. Again, this is becoming an industry standard throughout the country. And again, only the homeowners and auto insurance policies are billed. But it would require a city ordinance to enforce. So again, no out-of-pocket for a vehicle owner. Only the at-fault party is billed on vehicle accidents. If we would transport a patient of the at-fault party, we would not be able to bill because we can only bill the transport of that patient. But just as conservative estimates show, and it depend on call volume, that's why it's an estimate, but between 63 and 72,000 would be an estimate. And I'd take any questions on this if you have them.
Any questions for the chief on this? Chief, I have one quick question, if I may. The at-fault billing party, that just applies to, if I understand it correctly, just auto accidents. If there's a house fire, the homeowner would be the one that would bill, or the insurance policy owner would be the one that would be billed for that?
Correct.
follow-up, or excuse me, I have a question. Chair,
Go ahead.
sorry, I don't know why I said follow-up.
It's all right.
I was thinking about something else at the time. What, for instance, if a car just started on fire, say somebody had an electrical situation, who would you bill for that?
It would be the party that, the insurance policy of the vehicle itself.
The vehicle owner's
Correct.
insurance company
Yes.
would hopefully cover those costs?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Keiser?
Alderman Clem.
Just one that you mentioned right at the last, Chief. You mentioned that a house fire, take for example, that you'd bill the insurance company. What if a person didn't have insurance? Would you go after them, or would you drop it at that point, or?
No, we're only going after the money that's built into the policy now.
Okay.
So, yeah, we would not go after any individual.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
No, Alderman Busker.
looking at those figures, it kind of went fast, but I think it was extrication, they pay out more for that than they do for a house fire.
Correct.
I've been on both, and most of the time, a house fire takes a lot more work and effort. Is there a reason why that they pay
No,
out
it's
like
just
that?
what the insurance companies build into those. So I agree. It's much more labor intensive and a lot more going on and a lot more equipment used. But that's how the insurance companies have built that figure into it. It's the only thing you can get out of it or glean out of that policy.
All right, thank you.
Okay,
Mr.
Free-
Chair, I'd
Alderman
make
Clem.
a motion to put it in ordinance form to move forward.
I second that.
All right, we have a motion by Alderman Clem, seconded by Alderperson Bradshaw to put this in ordinance form. All in favor, say aye.
I have a question still, though.
Oh, go ahead, I'm sorry.
If I could. On this, you indicate that if you have to transport someone, then we're going at the thing, basically presentation one is what applies, the fees for presentation one.
Correct. That's right.
So this is just if you're on scene and things that, your actions that are taking place on scene, but doesn't require anybody going to the hospital or anything of that nature, right?
Not necessarily true. So if we have a two-vehicle accident and at-fault party is vehicle one and non-at-fault party is vehicle two, and we have patients out of vehicle two that need transport, those would be billed on their separate, just like we would any vehicle accident. But still, the vehicle one, who is the at-fault party, even if they don't go to the hospital, they will be billed for the car accident fee. The insurance company would.
Sure. Follow-up?
Go ahead.
Are there equivalent fees on the police side? Because I imagine these types of instances are, stuff work that you're going to be working side by side with these guys, right?
Correct. But I'm not sure if there are fees on the PD
Wish.
side of.
I'm just thinking here how I can.
I saw your face over there when we were talking about it. But, another follow-up then.
Go ahead.
Is it anticipated that if you put this in ordinance form, that you'd be dedicating these funds also to the fire improvement fund with the aforementioned 60-40 split?
Correct.
Okay. And you said this has kind of been coming forward more in the last 10 years or so. Why? Why is you've been doing ALS, BLS, ALS2 rates for how long? What's changed on this? Why is this something that requires ordinance approval?
We're seeing an increase in the cost of fire equipment, basically. So communities are looking why this become more standard, and Chief is because of the cost of equipment. A perfect example is a platform truck today will run us between 1.6 and 1.8 million.
Yeah.
What's that?
Alderman Parker.
That's the truck that has the
Yeah, the ladder truck with the platform.
platform on an extension. So we have one of those in our inventory. And what's a pumper?
$500,000.
Yeah, standard trucks.
Yeah.
So that it's become a way to offset some of that cost.
I can say too that fees being charged by fire departments is nothing new. I mean, I've been in and out of the fire service since '74, and even back then there were some departments, especially rural departments and stuff, that did charge fees for responding to different types of responses and different types of incidents. So this is not a new thing. It's just finally getting to the point where it's becoming more common amongst municipalities. All right, we have a motion on the floor to put this in ordinance form. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion pass. And you have one more thing, Chief. Go ahead.
Okay, and we're going to talk a little bit about lift assist or public assist fees. And in this presentation, I'm going to look more for direction on this than anything. It evolves out of an issue. So we're looking at just direction at this point and giving you some information to chew on. Lift assist, again, it's back to the call, I've fallen and I can't get up. And Life Alert has marketed that for years. And the call button goes to their dispatch, who calls our dispatch, who then, we are the ones that are the service provided to the people that fall. And it's part of a service that we've been able to provide our citizens for years. So these are the non-emergent calls, and they're for people that have limited mobility. They're aging population a lot of times. They have diminished health, or maybe they've lost strength just due to age, an injury that they're currently struggling with, or an illness. So we are, for lack of a better term, in the fire department, professional people movers. We move them in fires. We train all the time on how to move people between a bed and a wall, and no matter what, and the circumstances, we can move people. So that's part of what we provide. It's a free service to the public, and it also prevents further injury than somebody or a family member trying to lift that patient, which that family member could get hurt, or the patient itself could get dropped. So it's better for the person to call us. We'll come out, we'll get you back in bed, or we'll get you to where you need to go. The issue at hand is when healthcare providing agencies utilize this service to supplement their own staff. This was an issue I saw in Moline with nursing homes that would chronically understaff their departments or their nursing home late at night, and if they had an issue with the patient, they knew they'd call 911, the firefighters would come out, they'd put them back in bed, and it saved them a lot of money in the process. But as it turned out, we were having a lot of those calls. It was a big increase, and then of course we're taking on the liability for work comp injuries and those type of issues. What we're seeing here in Freeport is private ambulance services, and they're typically on calls where we have the 500-pound and plus patients. And they're calling us they call the ambulance, the private ambulance, because it's a non-emergent issue. They get there just for a doctor's appointment, they'll transfer them, they can't handle that patient. So they call for the fire department. Fire department comes out, maybe it's not enough, let's call another fire engine. Well, that wasn't enough on Christmas Eve. We had all of our units tied up on one patient to go for an evaluation at the hospital, and so they went to the house. The whole fire department in the city went to the ER. They returned to quarters. 5 hours later at 1 o'clock in the morning, everybody came back out to move this patient back. Well, who got to bill that incident? Not us. It was the private service that got to bill that. And it's becoming a habitual problem. In September, we had a firefighter injured on a call just like this, where he was off 3 months. He just came back January 7th, had to have surgery. So we incurred all those work comp claims, along with roughly about $18,000 in overtime. So this is an issue. We want to make sure that we don't continue to have this issue, and we need to do something to remedy this. So one of the things we could do, and this is what we did in Moline, we just did a written notification. We wrote them a letter, told them what was going to happen, what the issue was, and if you do it again, we're gonna bill you an amount of money. And typically, we went off of a wage scale and a FEMA schedule for what FEMA would charge if we deploy to an incident. And so we came up with about $145 an hour, and we minimum of a half-hour charge. That's one way we can do it. Another way that we can do it is if we arrive there and we decide, you know what, we can just as easily put this patient in your ambulance, and we can just as easily put him in our ambulance, and then we could bill that call just as we would normally bill a patient. So one way or another, we need to make sure that this service that we provide to our citizens isn't abused by those that don't want to pay extra to provide a service.
And Chief, you and I have talked about this. We've seen an increase in calls to the continuing care facilities. In fact, our guys, I think, made a call Christmas Eve or Christmas Day to an individual that had fallen out of bed. They didn't have enough staff, and their equipment was down to help assist with living. Our guys ended up having to respond to that. We're seeing that more and more. So they're using us as additional staffing and allowing them to take cost savings because they don't carry the staffing because they know the fire department will respond.
Mr. Chair.
Yes, Alderman Bradshaw.
Thank you. I really appreciate that presentation. I know this is something that's been talked about for some time. There are certain citizens that actually need help, say an elderly person that falls out of a chair that just needs help getting up. And my parents don't live in this community, but I'm going to use them as an example because they live in a small town in Arizona, and my dad has fallen a few times and my mom can't get him up. He's had some brain trauma. And she calls and she said she'd be glad to pay a little bit for a home visit to help pay for those costs, but they always say it's public assistance and they don't bill them. So I'm going to use them as an example that, you know, some places, some people are not necessarily poor because they're elderly. Sometimes they can pay a fee, but there are some that can't. So you've got that balance of trying to figure out what's appropriate. Now, when you have a for-profit business, an ambulance service that cannot serve their patient, and then they're calling our men in, and then they're still transporting the patient, they're still making a profit, and we are losing our taxpayer dollars to our citizens that's coming out of the city coffers. That's where I have my biggest issues and my biggest problems, especially when it comes to back and knee and shoulder injuries of our staff and our individuals that work for Freeport Fire. So I do agree with you that we should possibly make some changes, and hopefully with the council we can talk this over and get some of this done today too. Thank you.
Any further questions? I do have one quick one, Chief, and this is coming from my experience when I was on the department. I agree that the average citizen should not be charged. They pay taxes, they should get this service. However, you know and I know there are people out there that abuse this service. And you're out there once a week picking this person up. I just kind of like to throw the idea out that if we've got somebody like that that's using it all the time, maybe we should consider some kind of fee for that particular aspect. I don't know, it's just something I'm throwing out there because you and I both know what happens. And the average person, you get a call from them maybe once a month, once every other month, once every 4 months. But some of them, you know, the ones that abuse it every week or 2 or 3 times a week, I'm just wondering if we ought to consider some provisions for that, to consider a fee for that particular instance.
Yeah. So what we're going forward with tests with FHN is to set up to address the people that are the habitual callers, is to do so we are trying to address that separately. With this, we're really trying to address the companies that are making profit but are using us so they can profit more because they're not outfitting their home care at their facilities or ambulances well enough to support that. So we're using it. We're getting called out in the evening. We're getting our guys hurt while they're doing it, and that's what we're really. We believe that we need to take action, and it really came to a head when we had one of our firefighters severely injured, and put us in a situation where it cost us $18,000 because of an assist with one of these.
Mr. Chair.
Buster.
Yeah. Bear with me, I'm probably going to stumble here, but I can kind of thinking about this. Kind of wonder if we shouldn't, you know, I agree we should charge these, but kind of give maybe, you know, if you call more than so many times in a given time period, then we start charging, because I can see these nursing homes yeah, they're cutting their staffs to the bone, but what's gonna happen is, it's not gonna be the administration that's gonna be taking the heat for these calls. It's gonna be that nurse and that CNA that's working that entire floor that has a resident fall out of bed or not listen and wait for help to the toilet, and they're gonna be sitting there stressing because they don't wanna call 911, because what's gonna happen is they're gonna cost the company money and they're gonna end up getting written up or whatever there. So you know, it's really tough to see how we can manage. I see both sides of the coin here where I don't know if we can send a letter to the state if we have to go into that nursing home for so many times, so they start investigating that to get them more staff or what, but that's one issue I see with this.
In my
going forward.
experience in Moline, it actually, it kind of thwarted the whole problem. And there, at least, they started staffing and weren't calling us for those tasks that should have been able to be staffed for in the healthcare facility. That's just my experience.
Alderman Parker, and then Alderman Clem.
Yeah, I understand, you know, if it's a private ambulance that calls us to help them, I can see billing that ambulance, not the resident.
Correct.
Yes.
You know, I can accept that because they're making the profit, not the poor resident. And I like what Patrick said there about, you know, we have that now. If you get so many false alarms somewhere, you end up paying a fee after you have so many. Here, if somebody's a chronic abuser, and it's going to be very difficult to describe what that is, you know, they should have to pay more. But the ones that it's just here, off and on, here and there, and they are the senior citizens that are hurting. And unfortunately, I'm talking from experience from 2 years ago. So, you know, it's, and people can't pick them up. So and like I said, they do pay taxes, and they're residents, and they're paying taxes, and we don't charge for cops every time they go on a call. It's similar things. So, got some problems with this. I just wanted to voice my opinion.
Alderman Clem.
Chief Allen, I really appreciate you bringing this up and separating it the way it is. I would have never ever thought of, you know, us being called for an assistance for a private ambulance or for an assistance at a nursing home. You know, it's just something that you don't think of because you take for granted that they're staffed the way they ought to be. So I think that end of it, without a doubt, I think we need to move forward kind of with the whole works and see how we can alter some things. One of the other things, and you're talking about people my age here on a lot of these, you're also dealing with a number of people at home that are about this far from taking somebody to assisted living, and that chronic person that calls up 20 times for this and that, is it that much difference than the person that's keeping that person out of the nursing home? So, but I really think we need to take a look at these, and I appreciate you bringing them forward the way they are.
And I agree with a lot of the comments that are made. Alderman Busker, you did bring up a valid point. However, again, my concern is this company is out there making money, and they cut back manpower. Now, whether they're doing it intentionally because they know our firemen come out and help them or not, is something, you know, we'll probably never know for sure. But they're cutting manpower to cut money. And my own personal opinion is we charge them to go out there. I wouldn't have a personal problem with it, because, I mean, they're making money. They're the ones that didn't put the manpower there. And our resources are being used and our personnel are being put at risk. On a profit organization like that, I would have no trouble with it. But from what I'm hearing from the rest of the council, and give me a nod or a thumbs down, I think we need more discussion on this particular aspect of the topic, because there's a few items of contention that we need to iron out a little bit more on this. Pretty much the assessment on this.
Mr. Chair.
Alderperson Brasher.
Thank you. Chief, I have one more question for you. If, say, there was an elderly person in a nursing home that fell and could not get up, or a heavy-set person that fell and could not get up, and they call Freeport Fire, isn't it possible to bill the insurance company rather than the nursing home to assist that patient?
If we transported the patient, we could.
So, but not as a public assist, it would have to be with the transport only?
Correct.
Thank you.
Anyone else?
Chair.
Alderman McClenathan.
Well, I'm comfortable reviewing, in an ordinance form, didn't see what it looks like in regards to what you presented there. When we're assisting private companies on those calls, I'm not comfortable at this time adding a threshold in regards to the chronic users outside of a company. One, because as Manager Crowe said, we're looking to address that through the partnership that you guys are putting together. But if we want to look at the first part of it, I don't know that we need to delay the first part of that just to see what happens on the second part.
Okay, are you putting that in the form of a motion that we want to put that into ordinance form?
Yes, the motion would be to review an ordinance from a proposal on the parameters of what you presented there for a fee structure for lift assist with private companies, not as opposed to any, lift call that you come to.
Okay, we have a motion on the floor. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, motion by Alderman Clanathan, seconded by Alderman Clem, to put the concept in ordinance form for further discussion. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, motion passed. Okay,
Alderman Keister, if I could interrupt just for a moment. In the discussion for 8 and 9, they're actually quite lengthy, and we don't want to have to push those through quickly because of our time frame. So would the council be okay with next Monday night at 5 o'clock before the council meeting to discuss number 8 and number 9?
no problem with it.
I'm comfortable with that.
Okay, so if we're good with that, then we'll
Okay,
we'll put both those discussions then next Monday night at 5 o'clock.
okay. Next Monday at 5 o'clock, special committee of the whole meeting. Okay, so that moves us down. We'll skip 8 and 9, moves us down to item 10, public comments on agenda or non-agenda items for the committee of the whole. Anyone for that? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Motion to adjourn, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Oh, thank you.
I'm still not on. Okay. Okay, it's 6 o'clock. If we can get this meeting started. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll on the city council meeting tonight?
Mayor Miller,
Here.
Alderpersons Clem,
Here.
McClanathan,
Here.
Ross,
Here.
Parker,
Here.
Busker,
Here.
Brashaw,
Here.
Keister,
Here.
and Berberay is absent.
Okay, and if you could please stand and join us with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Alderman Keister.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, so we'll start with the approval of the agenda. Is there such a motion?
So move.
Second.
We have a motion made by Alderman Keister, seconded by Alderman Clem for the approval of the agenda. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. Item number 2 is approval of the minutes from the regular meeting of January 14th, 2019, I should say. Is there a motion for the approval of the minutes?
So move.
Second.
A motion made by Alderman Keister, seconded by Alderman McClanathan. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion passes. Are there any public comments? None there. So we will move on to item number 4, which is the consent agenda. All the items on the consent agenda are considered to be routine in nature and acted as one motion unless there's a member of the council that would like to have something removed for further discussion. Is there anyone that would like to have something for further discussion? Seeing none, we have the consent agenda consisting of approval to receive and place on file the minutes from the Liquor Commission meeting from November 8th, 2018, minutes from the Board of Fire and Police Commission meeting from October 3rd and November 27th, the Greater Freeport Partnership monthly report to the council, cash and investment report for December 31st, 2018, the financial reports for general, library, water, sanitation, sewer, storm sewer funds for December 2018, and B, which is the approval of the finance bills payable in the total of $821,625.17, and C being the approval of the payroll for pay period ending January 19th, 2019, in the total of $559,165.28. Is there such a motion for the approval of the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion made by Alderman Busker, seconded by Alderman Ross. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Keister,
Aye.
Clem,
Aye.
McClanathan,
Aye.
Ross,
Aye.
Parker,
Aye.
Busker,
Aye.
and Brashaw.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.
Thank you. Item number 5 is the presentation of the 2019 contracted services for monitoring the landfill for numbers 2, 3, and 4. And would that be you, Dennis? Are you starting that? No.
So it says in your agenda, Adam Holder. I'm Joel Zirkle, still with Fairground.
Joel, I actually think we have your brief. It's on unless you changed it.
What's that?
It's already on the computer. We've already got it loaded up.
Oh. I don't know where it is, though.
Okay. We'll bring our director of IT down, so. That's the website.
Oh, it's already there. All right, perfect. All right. So what I'd like to do is just give everybody kind of to baseline everybody, because some of you have probably know a little bit about the landfill, some of you maybe haven't. So I wanted to take an opportunity to kind of run through some just real fundamentals about the landfill, just to get everybody a little bit of familiarity. This all matches up to the actual contract that I believe is coming later. So the location of the landfill is down on South Walnut Street. There's actually a combination of 2 landfills. The first one is landfill 2 and 3. So landfill 2 and 3 originally opened back in 1971, and so it's highlighted there in blue. We have landfill number 4, which is the one that's taller. It's the one you might actually see from the road when you drive by it. Landfill 2 and 3 is kind of tucked back in there and a little bit hidden, so not everybody actually sees it. But original landfill 2 and 3, as I said, opened in 1971. Post-closure period actually began in 1987. And originally under that permit that was actually mandated as a 15-year post-closure period under those, we call them the old regulations, the old 807 regulations. And in about the last part of year 14, we started seeing contaminants showing up in monitoring wells. And so what that requires then is ongoing monitoring and management of that leachate. So that's why the groundwater monitoring, leachate monitoring continues. And part of the issue that we had there was to the south of that landfill, impacts were migrating underneath the old railroad tracks. So we put into place an area that we manage, it's called the groundwater management zone, which means we monitor that area to make sure it's not getting any worse, and that the impacts that are there, the natural environment has capacity to absorb those contaminants such that the creek is never impacted. And so in all these years that we've monitored that, there's never actually been any impacts to the creek south of landfill 2 and 3. About 8 years ago, we did install a leachate recovery system because the levels were increasing, so that we put some monitoring wells, or actually larger 4-inch recovery wells, in the waste, and we've been pumping that since. We've had years where we've kind of held it at bay. We've had other years where we've made slight progress. We're kind of in that slight progress mode right now. And the big thing that we have is with the current permit and the current regulations for landfill 2 and 3, we need to continue to do the leachate recovery system, the monitoring and reporting for the groundwater and the leachate, and then periodic inspections in order to keep the city in conformance with its current permit. So just quick, you can see there kind of in red and the line there, that just gives you a visual of kind of where that leachate recovery system is located on landfill 2 and 3. It's nothing too spectacular. It's just a line of wells that have pumps in them, and it flows into a manhole that discharges into the sanitary sewer along South Walnut Street. Landfill 4, originally permitted in 1986. It has, the liner in that system is both clay and what we call geosynthetic, so think of that as just a really fancy plastic that got put down. It has unlike landfill 2 and 3, this one actually does have an under drain system. We call that a leachate collection system. It's basically a sewer that has allowed the leachate that builds up in the landfill to drain off by gravity into the city sanitary sewer. We do have a geosynthetic cap, so that is the more state-of-the-art cap that covers over and keeps groundwater and precipitation from getting into the landfill. We did actually move towards actual final closure in 2013. That's when we got everything finally blessed from the Illinois EPA, even after the construction was done. In order to keep the city in conformance with its current permit, we do have to continue to do the groundwater monitoring, the leachate monitoring. We have to actually monitor for landfill gas, so that would be methane that's actually coming off of the landfill. And then we have periodic inspections that go along with that as well. So there's my lovely picture instead of Adam Holder. That's a really quick overview. Obviously, there's more detail in the actual proposal, but overall things are very similar to years in the past. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or I can wait until later. All right, thank you.
Mayor?
Alderman McClanathan.
Thank you. As we ask you guys kind of every year, I suppose are we still, we're still no ends timeline in sight?
No, unfortunately, there's not. With landfill 2 and 3 in particular, you know, we're holding things at bay. We're getting maybe some slight improvement, but the cost to try to get aggressive, very aggressive, to maybe try to accelerate that timeline is very expensive. And so, you know, and it would be a big, large capital expense all at once, where keeping things kind of in compliance and slowly moving in a positive fashion is kind of the mode that we've been in recent years.
The good news is we are starting to generate some income. We got $4,400 this year from the solar, and I know the solar, they've gotten approval from IEPA to put the solar site on the landfill.
Right.
And they're working with Fair Graham to make sure that's going forward, and once we get that, they'll be generating, it's $1,000 per acre per month.
And that
on
was actually a permit modification to the existing
per
permit
year.
that allows that
Yeah.
ballasted solar array to be installed. Yep.
Any further questions?
Madam Mayor?
Alderman Brashaw.
Thank you. City Manager Crowe, how many acres is that?
So the solar site is gonna go on landfill 2 and 3, which is, they're gonna actually put 17 acres worth of solar. The other good thing about going forward is they will also take care of the vegetation at that time, because they've also got an approval from the state of Illinois to get an additional grant to help them to make it as a monarch migration area
Right.
field. So,
Provides a habitat.
habitat.
Right.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any further questions? Seeing none, thank you. We move on to item number 6, which is the second reading of ordinance 2019-06. Madam Clerk, could you please read this?
An ordinance of the City of Freeport amending Chapter 236, Accounting and Finance, Section 236.02 of the City Code of Ordinances regarding the fiscal year for the city.
Thank you. Manager Crowe.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is the changing our fiscal year, and we are moving forward with be able to present you a 8-month budget as we go forward if this is approved. And this is endorsed by both our auditor, our actuary, and as well as our financial advisor as we go forward.
Thank you. Any questions?
Madam Mayor?
Alderman Brashaw.
Thank you. Manager Crowe, I did read through your notes, and I see that a lot of cities are going with this combination to line up their fiscal year as we are planning on doing. Do you know if all cities are going for this, or what the percentage of cities are realigning their fiscal years?
So there are on an average of between 5 and 8 communities every year that make this change. Rochelle was the most recent one that's close to us. And the real reason is specifically the downstate communities, the ones outside the collar counties, are finding it much tougher to determine what their levy should be if they don't know what the budget cost is. And you know, I don't have the overall percentage unless, do you, but I know this is, talking with Spear Financial, they're seeing more and more of their communities go to this, and as the auditor has, as Klein, our auditor did, and as Lautenbacher and Amon has done. Lautenbacher and Amon serves as actuaries for 326 communities across the state of Illinois, and they say more, they're actually making this recommendation to more and more of the communities to do this.
Follow up? I can actually see, you know, that this is very positive for our community. I guess what I'm kind of looking for is the basis of communities that have gone through this. Have you heard that they've had good results with their planning? Has it made their lives easier? Has it been easier for their staff? Do we know any of those follow-ups yet?
So, well, Randy, go ahead.
I've worked in other states, and in Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Wisconsin. In those states, we were on a calendar year as our fiscal year, and so the entire state was that way. Illinois is kind of unique in that you've got the municipalities on a May 1st fiscal year, the states on a September 1st fiscal year, and then you get involved with the federal government. Any grants you have there, you got an October 1st fiscal year. So it's, and then who knows? You know, you talk about school districts, they are on, I believe, July 1st fiscal year. So really it gets complicated. The nice thing about going with the the January 1st fiscal year is that the quarters now match up with your federal and your federal program, because you're not trying to split a quarter up to make your quarterly report. And it also helps us as far as you know, trying to plan how much we need to levy in property taxes, especially when it comes to the pension funds, because we'll have all that information available and we'll be able to do that, you know, to plan it out then.
And then also, some of the other things is, a lot of our art contracts are already working on a calendar year, such as, it will make it easier for us for health insurance, property insurance, our leasing program, as we go forward, which are our large expenses. The one thing we are gonna have to do as we go forward, and Roxanne and I have already talked about this, is as we go forward, we're gonna have to negotiate the contracts, and the fire and police contracts are set to begin negotiation, so that they're aligned to that calendar year.
Madam Mayor?
And actually, Attorney Sosnowski would like to add something to that.
Yes, Alderwoman Bradshaw, I don't know if it helps answer your question, but the city of South Beloit recently did this about 18 months ago and moved their fiscal year, which was very similar to the city of Freeport's, to a January 1 to December 31st. The reason why they did that is the same things that you're hearing here. It helped plan better for expenses as well as property tax revenue and when that comes in. And what we had to do with the collective bargaining agreements, as the city manager stated, is we had to negotiate the term that was a little bit shorter the first time around so that we could get the CBAs then lined up with the new fiscal year, but that is possible to be done. To do this does require, and you'll see it in the ordinance, a shorter period of time in which we call the gap, and we'll have to have an audit. So you do have an additional expense for that additional audit to cover that gap period. But from everything that I've heard, bringing your fiscal year in line with your calendar year is helpful from a planning perspective. Now, with regard to statutory authority, we've drafted this ordinance on the basis of your home rule powers that allow you to set your own fiscal year. I know many municipalities have changed their fiscal year that are both home rule and non-home rule to a January 1, December 31st, even despite the fact that there's no specific statutory authority to do so. In fact, if you look at the finance chapter of the Illinois Municipal Code, there is no reference to what the designated fiscal year needs to be other than in the definitions section of the finance chapter. And it states with some old language that probably dates back to the 1960s or 70s that your fiscal year should be in line with a period of time in which your municipal elections are held. That said, there's a provision also in the chapter that states that for municipalities that are in excess of 500,000 in population, their fiscal year has to begin on January 1st. So I think what we're seeing is a move for most municipalities to align their fiscal years with that of what a larger municipality would already have to follow.
Mayor Miller?
Go ahead.
Thank you. I want to congratulate you, City Manager Crow. This is something that we've talked about with previous administrations. I'm sure Alderman Clem would agree and Alderman Keister that with mayoral leadership in the past, we have talked about this, but it had never come to fruition. So thank you for your work on this, and thank you all your department heads that are also going to have to work with your budgets.
Mayor,
Alderman Keister.
just one quick question. We're doing this under home rule. Now, there has been talk about sometime in the near future we're going to be losing home rule now. If we do this now, does it automatically revert back to what it was if we lose home rule, or does it stay where it's at? Because I know some of the taxes and stuff we do at home rule we'll lose if we lose home rule. Is it going to change it?
It will not change. I'm sorry, is it okay if I answer that? It will not change. In the Finance Act, it says, except as otherwise provided by ordinance. So because the city of Freeport, assuming that you approve this amendment, if it's approved by ordinance, regardless of whether or not it's passed under your home rule powers, it will remain your fiscal year.
Any further questions? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll on the passage of Ordinance 2019-06?
Alderman Keister,
Aye.
Clem,
Aye.
McClanathan,
Aye.
Ross,
Aye.
Parker,
Aye.
Busker,
Aye.
and Bradshaw.
Aye.
And that ordinance passes 7-0.
And we'll move on to item number 7, which is the first reading of Ordinance 2019-07. Could you please read this for the record?
An ordinance authorizing the sale of certain items of personal property by the city.
Director Carr, did you want to take this? Nope. Chief Allen? Okay.
Yeah, the majority of the items on this list are going to come out of the fire department, although there are a few items added to it from Public Works, and I believe the city administration too. But all this is, we did some cleanup around the station. There's some items that are surplus, ambulance cots, different types of equipment that we just need to get moved, and this is probably the best way to get rid of this equipment.
Mayor,
Alderman McClanathan.
motion to approve. Second.
Mayor,
Alderman Keister.
I'm presuming when these are authorized for sale, they'll be under sealed bids. Okay.
Any further questions? Okay, then we have a motion on the floor made by Alderman McClanathan, seconded by Alderman Busker to move ordinance 2019-07 on to the next regularly scheduled. That's what you intended, correct? Alderman McClanathan? Okay. Moving on to the next regularly scheduled meeting. Moving on to item number 8 is the approval of the 2019 contracted services for the monitoring for the landfills, numbers 2, 3, and 4 from Fairgram. Dennis, did you have further things that you wanted to add with that?
No, I believe the contract was lined out in the attachments. It is very similar to what it was last year as well as the year before.
It is a reduction, slight reduction in cost, right? Joel?
You said it was.
I believed it was if I looked at the numbers right.
The only exception to that would be this year we do need to do some repairs to some of the pumps. It's kind of like a deferred maintenance situation where we are to that point, but it's virtually level, so it's not quite, it was looking like that until we addressed the issue with the pumps.
Okay.
Yep.
Any further discussion?
Madam Mayor,
Alderman Brashaw.
motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion made by Alderman Brashaw, seconded by Alderman Ross for the approval of the contracted services. If there's no further discussion, Madam Clerk, would you please take the roll?
Keister.
Aye.
Clem.
Aye.
McClanathan. Ross.
Aye.
Parker.
Aye.
Busker.
Aye.
And Brashaw.
Aye.
That motion passes 7-0.
Okay, we will move on to department head reports. Finance.
Thank you, Your Honor. I really have nothing to report for tonight.
Thank you. Community and Economic Development.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have two quick things. The Historic Preservation Commission met Friday. It was a special meeting for the last day for projects for the facade program to get their Certificate of Appropriateness, or COA. We had 5 projects that attained that COA as part of their facade program application. The applications are due this Friday. Nice to see that continued interest in the program and those individuals wanting to invest in the downtown buildings. Just a reminder, the next step is the commission will make their funding recommendations to you during a public hearing on the 19th of February, and then the council makes the final funding decisions at the March 4th meeting is what's scheduled. And I also wanted to let you know Pretzel City Transit will not be operating this Wednesday or Thursday. That's due to the extreme cold. They will resume operations on Friday morning. Thank you.
Thank you. Public Works.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to kind of reaffirm that we are still under a snow emergency. So the parking regulations are still out there. So please obey. It makes plowing easier, quicker. With that, our guys are going to be out plowing and hauling snow for most of this week whenever we can safely. And as a heads up, with the temperatures dipping where they are, salt is pretty much useless from now until Friday. So what's out there is going to kind of stay out there on the ground. So drive safe. It's going to be slick.
And it's useless because?
Once the temperature gets to a certain point, the salt does not melt the snow anymore.
It's typically when it drops below 0, the salt will no longer activate.
At 10 degrees.
Mayor.
Alderman Keister.
As for the general public and stuff, especially seeing what I've seen on the way in here, could you go over once again what the parking regulations are for a snow emergency, please?
Yes, the language in our ordinance kind of states it in a difficult way, but on an even day, park on the even side. On an odd day, park on the odd side.
Okay, thank you.
Fire.
Two items, Mayor, thank you. First one, we're all prepared for the cold coming up, so we're making preparations in the fire department, and try to move forward and get through the next few days. Secondly, I want to thank, or actually congratulate the police department on their victory, and a lot of.
I wasn't going to bring it up, seriously.
So it was a good day. We had a lot of fun, and you know, more importantly, we raised money for a good cause, and I believe it was $1,200. Correct, Chief? It was right in that range, or was it matched?
It was contributed onto that. Sounds like the last total I got was around $2,000.
Awesome.
So yeah, it is awesome.
Yep.
Okay, thank you. Police.
Oh, thank you. I just wanted to add on about the snow emergencies. Remember, it's still in effect until Wednesday at 6 p.m. So the parking ordinance, and it does go odd and even. Thank you, Director Carr. But also, I want to add: don't forget about 24-hour cars that are parked out there. As your neighbors will notice when a car is completely buried by snow, and it's been over 24 hours since there's been a snowstorm. So we got to get those moved out, unbury those, and like Director Carr said, it's important to get the roadways cleared. Also, I want to touch on a month from today, February 28th, we'll be having our Civilian Police Academy. Starts our spring edition. So we're having a big push. We're trying to get the applications out. It's on the website, our new city website. It's a beautiful website. Check it out. Those applications are on that. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Water and sewer.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to bring up two things. First, with the cold weather that we're expecting the next few nights, on the city's website, there's a little article as to what suggestions to look to go and do if with these cold temperatures, so as not to have frozen pipes in your house. And then also this past Saturday, with the weather the way it was, the snow, the cold, we had a water main break on Waddell, and the crews were out there taking care of that. And I'd like to publicly express, you know, my thanks in them working in those adverse conditions, and look to. I'm looking toward Friday.
As are we. IT, did you have something? And library.
Oh, geez, okay. All right. I have two things. One, you'll notice that I gave you all a calendar of all of the events for the NEA Big Read. There's book discussions, movie showings. Our big kickoff event is on Saturday, and the Lao American Organization of Elgin will be performing at 11, and story time and crafts at 10 a.m. So it'll be a lot warmer. It'll feel like a heat wave. So we're looking forward to that. Officially, Freeport Public Library is a warming station. So we are not planning on closing on Wednesday. So we will be open if any of your constituents are out of power, if there's water main breaks, you know, there's a place for them to come. So just wanted to let you know that. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate that. Manager's report.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I wanted to update council. Our pre-disaster mitigation grant was forwarded after much work to FEMA today by Illinois FEMA. We had a lot of work over the last week and also this weekend working, and I appreciate all of the staff working community development. There were some additional requirements and making sure that our grant was ready to go. It looks like that we may be the only grant that Illinois has submitted for this project going forward. So this is They work very closely with us to make sure that this works and now we'll be waiting. We should hear sometime in July, August if we've been awarded it. We are, because of the cold, we were going to do a kickoff meeting for the comprehensive plan on the 31st. That has been moved to the 14th. The ratio didn't feel safe in traveling to come up here to do the with the working groups, so that we'll be getting more information out about that. GFP is fully staffed as right now. They've done their last hire. Nicole Haas took over the marketing position. Well, the last thing is staff has started working. We're going to start having an additional newsletter go out. There is a registration button on the website that you can register. If you want to receive it via email, we're also going to be putting that newsletter out in coffee shops, coffee restaurants, so that it's another way to get information out. Each department submits an article for each month as we go forward to kind of talk about issues going out within the city. And that's all I have, Matt.
Okay, thank you. And then just to continue to talk a little bit about the weather, I would just like to announce what our warming centers are. Along with the library during the daytime hours when they're open, that is a place that people can go for a warming shelter, as is the Salvation Army on Exchange Street, but they're only open if the temperatures are below 0. So for the next few days, that will be a spot, obviously, because we'll be below 0, as is the Department of Human Services on West Avenue. Those are all daytime, and for the evening hours, the FACC on Chicago is open from 6 p.m. until 8:30 a.m., and they serve a meal at 6:30 as well as breakfast before closing. And they also have laundry and shower facilities for those that have that need. And then we will move on to Alderman Keister.
Thank you, Mayor. Just one real quick thing. We're talking about the cold weather and the snow and everything else. It's going to be very nasty and very bitter cold. Everybody knows that. You see it on the news. Remember, if it's too cold for you, it's too cold for your pets as well. Do not leave them out during these periods of time because they can get hypothermia, frostbite, and everything else too. And, you know, if you just put them out, make sure you no more than 5 or 10 minutes and get them back in. And that's all I have, Mayor.
Thank you. Alderman Clem.
I just wanted to, had a reminder also, Mayor, like you did, and the city manager did about the warming center. Very important for some of the people in the city to have a place to go. Also, for all you guys and your work crews, for God's sake, be safe. We know how easy it is to get frozen out there in this weather, and especially how easy it is to get hurt. And thank you guys, Chief Allen last Saturday for, what, 20 below, putting out a small fire. We appreciate that. The Salvation Army still needs some volunteers for different things, but thank you guys for everything that you've done for them over the winter and everything. And if there's something else that you can do to help them, please don't hesitate to give a call. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderman McClanahan.
I just also wanted to echo the comments regarding thank you to the various departments. You had, you know, fire out and police out, all the public works out, you know, water and sewer portion division, and street division, in difficult conditions. And a lot of times you hear the complaints, but, you know, none of us, you know, none of us want to be outside, but you guys are outside, you know, doing that. So really, we do appreciate it, especially, you know, this time of year. So thank you.
Alderman Ross.
Yes, I'd like to ditto what everyone else is saying. Yeah, Saturday morning, I sat there and watched the street department, 20 below 0 out there cleaning the streets. And that's pretty remarkable. That's really good. I mean, all city employees deserve a big round of applause because I'm telling you now, it's cold out there. And there ain't no ifs, ands, or buts about that. So I just say thank you guys. You're doing a great job.
Alderman Parker.
Yeah, a couple things. One, to touch on what Officer Chief Barklow said about the snow tickets. There's been a lot of tickets issued in my neighborhood, and these people don't understand with their car in the way, you can't plow them streets, and that's their first complaint. So I did see a lot of tickets being issued, and I'm glad to see that. Second is the ball game. It was a great time, great team won, and unfortunately Lowell and I had to pay extra money because we don't know how to shoot free throws. So that was good. And yeah. The other thing is, personally with me and about 6, 7 other people in my neighborhood now did not get their water bill this month. And there is a mix-up. I went down to the water department today, asked about mine, and mine was within 2 days of being late. So I paid mine today, and they said that if they're late because you don't get the bill, they're gonna waive that late fee. But just be careful, it's going to be corrected, but there are a lot of people not getting the water bill, and they don't even think about it till they get that bill to pay. They don't pay it, all of a sudden, they're getting that late notice, so will be corrected, is that correct? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, good. Yeah, that's no big deal, and that's it.
Thank you, Alderman Parker. Alderman Busker
Nothing more to say tonight. Thank you.
and Alderman Brashaw.
Thank you, Mayor Miller. I do have a few things to say. First of all, I want to thank our Freeport snow plow drivers. They don't get thanked enough, and they've been criticized a lot, and our constituents complain constantly about things with their mailboxes, their driveways, and they don't realize how tough it is to maneuver around all the obstacles that the drivers have to do. There again, like I tell them, I say the snowplow drivers do not mean to bury your car, your mailbox, or the end of your driveway in. This is unfortunately the fallout of plowing city streets, and in order to keep the public safe, they have to clear the streets and the roadways, and yes, you may have to do the end of your driveway more than once. I asked them to please contact the city hall if they have a specific complaint regarding damaged mailboxes, instead of calling me, because I'm not going to reinstall a mailbox. But the city manager can maybe line somebody up to help fix their mailbox or straighten it out in the spring. There again, if you notice a neighbor is illegally blowing snow into your yard or sidewalk or driveway, contact the city officials, because I can't go out there and ticket them personally either. We've had several complaints regarding this. Please, if you have a fire hydrant or a fire plug, as I like to call them, in your yard or adjacent to your neighbor's property, and you notice it isn't dug out, please, from the street side, dig that fire plug out and make sure you get the snow removed from it a few feet in every direction. It can actually save lives for the amount of time it takes the firefighters to dig it out in case there is a fire. And speaking of that, my husband and I have good friends that recently just had a fire at their home in Freeport, and it's the McDaniel family. Fortunately, everyone was okay, and Lindsay McDaniel is a nice teacher in our community and very well loved by the entire community. Them and their 5 children and 2 dogs all were out safely, and they wanted to publicly thank the Freeport Fire Department for quick response. Thank you.
Thank you.
McDaniel.
We will move on to item number 13, which is public comment. Tommy.
Chief, I saw something by the parking lot where the cars covered the snow on by Jefferson Street. And I saw it, meaning that Presswood Transit saw it, parking over the snow stuck in the neighbor's house.
Okay, all right, thanks.
I just wanted to tell you that so you told the cops about it.
Sure.
Because I saw it.
Okay, we'll take a look at it when I give you a ride home.
Okay, I just wanted to tell you that so you know.
Sure.
And want to tell Joey Mill we miss you at the city council meeting.
Thanks, Tommy.
I wanted to tell Tom, Andrew, you did a good job.
Thank you, Tommy.
And I want to tell Don Parker, that's a good job about that. But about the basketball.
Thank you.
And you did a good job of walking Luckberry.
Thank you, Tom.
Are there any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 14, which is executive session. Madam Clerk, could you please read this for the record?
Pursuant to 5 ILCS 122C21, discussion of minutes lawfully closed under this act, whether for purposes of approval by the body of the minutes or semi-annual review of the minutes as mandated by Section 2.06, with action to follow after the closed session.
Is there a motion to enter into executive session?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion made by Alderman Busker, seconded by Alderman Keister. Madam Clerk, could you please take the roll?
Keister.
Aye.
Clem.
Aye.
McClanathan. Russ.
Aye.
Parker.
Aye.
Busker.
Aye.
And Brascia.
Aye.
Motion passes 7-0.